Hi, welcome to this week's Authors Love Readers podcast, where we delve into the stories behind the stories. We're asking authors questions, some of them fun, some of them serious, and from their answers, you're going to learn things you never knew about the people who write the stories you love. My name is Patricia McLinn. I'm your host and designated question asker.
I'm Pamela Fagan Hutchins, and I'm an author who loves readers.
Now, let's start the show. Hi, and welcome to this week's edition of Authors Love Readers podcast. My guest this week is Pamela Fagan Hutchins, and we have only met in person once, I think, right?
One time.
Yeah. Listeners will be astonished to know it was at Novelist Inc. That seems to be a recurring theme here. But Pamela contacted me because we both write murder mysteries set in the West. And so we had some exchange of information and ideas and experiences. And to my absolute jealousy, she has a place on the eastern slope of the Bighorn Mountains in Wyoming, which I think is among the most beautiful places in the world. With that, tell us a little bit about what you write, Pamela.
I write, as you said, murder mysteries, and the mysteries that I write are full of all the good stuff. Romance, humor, a little practical magic. The protagonists are, kick-ass women. The overarching world that I create I call the what doesn't kill you world. But for each of my protagonists, they get their own trilogy within that world because I look for kind of a three-book character arc for each of my protagonists. And then, frankly, I get bored and go on to the next one. Short attention span.
So tell us the names of some of those trilogies.
So I have written a Caribbean-based trilogy, the Katie trilogy, and Katie is a hot mess of an attorney that needs to basically, at the age of 35, get her act together and runs off to the Caribbean to do that after her parents die in suspicious circumstances there. Then we have the series that you and I got to know each other over, which is my Emily trilogy, and she's a former rodeo queen and barrel racer who tucks tail and runs back to her hometown and goes to work for a hot criminal lawyer. And much fun ensues from there in West Texas and New Mexico. I have the Michelle trilogy, which is based in Texas primarily, and she is Katie's law school roommate. So all these female protagonists are in a world of buddies, and it's probably my most emotional and most depth to it of my mysteries. She faces more in terms of personal tragedy than the others do, and it's also the series where one of the mysteries in it won the Silver Falchion for Best Mystery last year. So I love my Michelle. And then there's the Ava trilogy. That's set back in the Caribbean again, Katie's best island friend. And she's a pop star. She's deeply, think of her as Rihanna in murder mysteries. And so I had a lot of fun with her. And right now I'm writing the Maggie Killian trilogy, which is set in Wyoming.
Yay!
Yay! Now, we love our Wyoming books.
I'm totally going to jump to a writing question. And this is a question that a reader asks about whether when we finish a series like that or finish a book, do we miss the characters and think about them? And then my follow-up question to that would be, are you tempted to go back and revisit any of these characters?
That's a great question because they're our friends, right? They're close to us by the time we've lived with them for sometimes years. And I do miss them. I'm lucky in that even as I go on to a new protagonist, I can choose to resurrect one and bring her in for a strong supporting role. For instance, I really missed Katie. She was my first 3 novels featured Katie, and my last 3 that I've just written, I brought her back as a strong second. And I would cry in the scenes when I would write with her and Ava because I felt so strongly about their friendship because of it's my friendship with them too.
Oh, that's terrific. So Do you have a childhood book or a story that you can look at, you can pinpoint and say, yeah, this is what really got me hooked on stories?
Wow, it's a whole library's worth. I remember my earliest memories of loving books were little paperback books on Native Americans, and I was obsessed with. I wanted to be just like them and live back them. So it was a cross between I wanted to go back in time and I wanted to write stories. But I was greatly influenced by everything from Where the Red Fern Grows in Old Yeller because of my love of animals and Black Beauty to Heidi and Trixie Belden and the Nancy Drew books and Cheaper by the Dozen, which I still think is one of the funniest things I've ever read. And it's just, that's my entire childhood revolved around hiding under the covers with a flashlight reading.
Yeah, like our parents wouldn't notice, right?
Yeah, that big honk with a shining light under your covers.
But the great thing for me was my bed backed up to a bookshelf. So like the bookshelf was the headboard. And I thought this was ideal.
That's perfect. That's perfect.
When you were reading those stories or experiencing those stories early on, especially, in your pre-author days, did you ever mentally or physically rewrite the endings?
Oh, goodness. I never did. What I would do is I would immediately turn to the beginning and read it again. I wouldn't even go on to a next one. So if it's one that I loved, I might read it 3 or 4 times before I could let it go. Because of how much I loved it. But I never rewrote the end. I did always picture myself in it somehow. Did you ever do that? Did you see yourself in the stories?
Yes. Especially I had a book of stories that were sort of, I guess, based on Shirley Temple stories.
Oh, yeah.
And so when you said Heidi, that triggered that. There was also Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm.
Oh, yes.
Just love that.
And Anne of Green Gables and the Little House on the Prairie books. And I just get so excited. I get goosebumps when I talk about all these kids' books.
Were you ever tempted to write historicals?
I have from time to time thought about writing historicals. I think that most authors I meet have a longer list of things they'd like to write than they will probably ever get to. And it's on my list of things that I want to do. We'll see if I get there. I keep getting sidetracked.
I have a 7-book series, historical series based on the history of Wyoming. And I've written most of one book, which I thought was book 1. And then I realized it was book 2, which really slowed me down. So I have to get back to that at some point. But yes, there are so many stories and so many things to explore.
I would love to write my husband's grandmother came across from Hungary at the age of 18 without her family and moved to America, eventually pursued and became a citizen. But I go back to that moment where she's deciding and leaving her family in Hungary, when she's an 18-year-old girl, to never see them again. Right. And I just... none of us know the story of what would make her do that. I want to write that story so badly. So that's coming someday.
I look back at my ancestors, and some of my ancestors from Ireland come from a place called Mullenhead, which is the northernmost point in the island of Ireland. It's in the Republic in Donegal, but it is the northernmost point. And I stood there, and it is breathtaking, partly because of the wind, but it is also... And I thought about the people who had left there and what it took, and that it was, it was saying goodbye for a lifetime at that point. So unlike what we do now. And it was a moment that obviously stays with me and probably always will, about what those people did.
These days, we're posting to Facebook before the plane even takes off, when we're changing locations. I also think about my mother, who moved to Wyoming when she was in her mid-20s, And my dad was a young physician, which there are a ton of great stories from that era of him having to back up for the vet. And, he gets called into the emergency room in the middle of the night for a patient with a broken leg, with air quotes around my head. And they says, "Where's the patient?" And they're like, "In the horse trailer, doc. Where do you think?" But my mom moved to Wyoming for this great adventure. And this was in 1975, and long distance was expensive. And she ultimately couldn't bear to be away from her mother and her sister, and even so recently feels historical with the rate of change, and the just leaving just isn't the same anymore. We'll probably never get to experience something like that except through our imagination.
But we can through our imaginations. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah,
I can't wait.
My folks were married Dad, they were married in July, and Dad was called up in December of 1941 because he'd been in ROTC in college. And so they were this brand new married couple, and he was in the Army from then until the end of 45. And overseas twice, but whenever he wasn't overseas, Mom would travel around with him, and my older siblings came along during that. I was a surprise well after. It's a good thing Dad made it through World War II, because I wouldn't have been here. But they would, and the way they traveled, and, you think about all the accoutrements that people travel with now with kids, and they would put everything in their little car. And my sister apparently slept in the drawer of a dresser, and they stayed because when they'd be at these army posts, these little towns were suddenly overrun, and Dad shot more than one rat in a bedroom. Once they stayed in what was basically a whitewashed former pigsty.
Oh, my.
Oh, yeah. They had adventures. And we used to always joke about my mother cutting a swath through the country with her Lysol. So, wherever Mom had been, it was clean.
Rat be gone.
Yeah. Well, we got way off, but let's see. What's your favorite taste?
Salty.
Salty. Okay.
I crave salt.
Yeah. Do you have let's go back to earlier days. Do you have a song from your young days that you really identified with or meant a lot to you?
Captain and Tennille. And I loved everything from Captain and Tennille, but the one that sticks with me is "Love Will Keep Us Together."
Oh, my.
But Olivia Newton-John, just all of that era when you're first discovering music, magical. And all of my parents' old records from their high school days, which they saved. So the Everly Brothers, I just remember just putting it on the record and watching it spin around and listening to it over and over and over, and feeling like I could picture how my parents would listen to that same song. At that point, it had been 10, 15 years before, and it was that same album down to the scratches. I just loved it.
Yeah, the scratches often meant something too, right? How about these days? Do you have a song, or do you listen to a certain kind?
I tend to create a playlist around a protagonist, and then for a period of time, however long I am writing that protagonist, a year, 2 years, I listen to that music. So right now I'm really into Americana, some old stuff like Lucinda Williams, and then newer artists that are probably not all that well known, but if I could give a plug to Moores and Macomber, they're really fantastic. And so I'll create this playlist, and before I even start writing the protagonist, I'll start listening to this music over and over and over, refining who I add to it, what songs, what order. And a lot of times it'll end up telling me the story. The story is telling itself to me before I realize I have the character arc down, because I'm unconsciously arranging the songs to fit the progression. So that's what I've been doing right now with my Wyoming character, Maggie. Last year, it was all about Caribbean music. So Rihanna, Sade, et cetera, because I had this pop star from the Caribbean. I'm enjoying the Americana more.
How about Chris Ledoux?
I have Chris Ledoux on this list.
I knew you had to.
Copenhagen makes me feel so good.
Had to have
And
Chris.
many more.
One of my early trips to Wyoming was traveling with a friend, and it was tapes at those times, but we got some tapes that we were playing Chris Ledoux as loud as you could do it as we drove across the Bighorn Basin.
Chris Ledoux in 1975, 76 was at the pinnacle of his bareback bronc career, and he had just won at the National Finals Rodeo. So that's when we were living in Wyoming. I was a little kid in Buffalo. My dad was a doctor, and my dad had this young guy come in and say, Doc, I think this is broken. And so my dad casted him up, and he came in the next week and he didn't have the cast on anymore. And he said, where'd your cast go? He said, well, I had to ride last weekend, just a little rodeo. And can you wrap me up again? And this went on every week for a while. It was Chris Ledoux. And at one point, my dad, who didn't know that this, he didn't make any big deal of himself. He didn't say, I just won the bareback, national championship. He just kept saying, well, Doc, I got to make a living. And my dad would say, you need to stop riding until this heals. I can't do it. Can't make you that promise. Next week, he'd come on in again.
There is something about that lifestyle and that approach.
They're a little different from you and me, but gosh, I love them.
Well, now, okay, this sort of segues from rodeo and bareback riding and bronc riding. Do you have any fears? Do you have any strong fears? And do you use them in books?
I have an incredible fear of two things. One is looking down from heights, which is crazy because I live on the face of a mountain. We trail ride in the mountains, we hike in the mountains, but there are places where my husband knows I am going to back out of there, and I'm hyperventilating and my eyes are rolled back. But my tolerance has become a lot higher than it was normally. But my second fear is of loss of my husband or kids, and that's kind of the recurring. If you wake up in a cold sweat, that's the nightmare I'm having. So I fear that a lot more than heights.
I always remember as a kid being on a trail ride in the mountains. This was, I think, in Tennessee. So it's the Blue Ridge rather than the Bighorns. But I'm on this horse, and I said, well, what's the horse's name? And they said, Lucky. And I said, okay, why is his name Lucky? They said, because he walks on the edge of the path and he hasn't fallen off yet. Okay, I'll use it in a book someday. Okay, I have this amazing little desert island that you're going to be exiled to forevermore. But it has the ability to play movies, but only 3 movies. So what 3 movies are you going to have that you're going to watch over and over and over and over and still love? Which 3 movies are you taking with you?
Okay, let's see here. Dances with Wolves. 50 First Dates. I love that movie. And I only get one more. Let's throw it way back and do Heaven Can Wait with Warren Beatty.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. Now, that's interesting that I like to try to see if there are connections among them. I can sort of see Heaven Can Wait and Dances with Wolves. These sort of very individual men thrown into very unusual circumstances.
With 50 First Dates, too, I feel like in Heaven Can Wait, he was essentially getting a little bit of a do-over. Yeah. And with 50 First Dates, that's what's happening again and again and again. So maybe I also have a thing for try again or second chances. But I don't know what connects 50 First Dates with Dances with Wolves. That's maybe a harder stretch.
Sort of a start over for him, too. He goes into a totally different life.
You're right. I think we've just nailed something about my personality. He does.
And maybe that's why you like to do these sequential trilogies.
I think that that's very much the case. I want a chance to do it again too. And there's not only I want a chance with this new person and this new place, and yet to take some of the best, keep what's good, make new friends but keep the old kind of theory.
Yeah.
But I also love the challenge.
Other gold.
I love thinking, can I start something completely different? Can I do a completely different voice? Can I be a completely different place and person? And so I love that. And I guess I relate to that in my entertainment as well.
That's interesting, sort of the connection to the pioneering, and going new places and taking new things.
You have another... Oh, hi, Callie.
Yeah, that was good.
Prettiest dog. You got to follow Pat on Instagram and see pictures of Callie. But you have a second career, or maybe an old career you want to confess, as a psychiatrist, or at least a psychologist. But maybe that's what a journalist really is, in some level.
To an extent. I was always interested in psychology in college until I learned you had to take statistics. I said, never mind. we will do something else here. So let's get in some questions from readers.
Okay.
I have two from them, and I'm going to combine them. I do this because they connect in my mind. Sure. Anyhow. When the cover image doesn't match the character description, and the reader says that's a pet peeve of hers, how does it feel to the author? And then the other part is, how much does it bother you to find editing errors after your book goes live?
Okay, we're taking B first because I'm hyperventilating. Hate it. Absolutely strive for error-free, because as a reader, I want an experience where I'm not distracted. I want to be so completely able to immerse myself in character and story that I don't have something jerking me around. And to me, errors are like fingernails on a chalkboard, or the screech of a needle across a record. So I take it really seriously when people find errors. On the other hand, there are things that are stylistic. There are errors we make on purpose. You know the rules to break the rules. And so I sometimes have creative differences with a reader from time to time who really believes the comma should be somewhere else, but the pause I hear in my head and the way the dialogue is spoken is different. So with apologies to readers who may have a creative difference to me, if you let me know about an error, I can promise you my team fixes it immediately. And you may not see that reflected in the book that you're holding, because you that's the one you've got, but the next reader is going to have that much better of an experience because of you.
Yes.
So with the respect to covers, and for readers that have a different image for a cover than what they see on the outside of the book, or they develop a different image once they get into the book, that's a tougher one for me for two reasons. One is that it's like that with movies too, right? When we change from something that's the written to the visual, then it's no longer completely dependent upon the reader of the imagination interpreting the words on the page. And so with a lot of respect for reader experience, readers can vary widely on how they would have pictured it and done it. So can authors, so can cover designers. And I am not a graphic designer. I wish that I was. I wish that I could take what I see in my head and I could imagine it into being like I could with words, but I can't. And so for readers that have a negative reaction to the covers, I would beg their indulgence and say the author has the most control over what comes in between those covers, and that it's just one representation of the imagination stirred by the book that you see when it's on the cover. Their covers are very, very challenging. It's difficult to distill an entire book into what every person would take away from that book, or what everyone would want to see, to represent that book. Somebody's about to get in trouble in there, Callie. You're lucky because I've got 3 rescue dogs, and they happen to be out with our team of Amish fence builders right now, helping them build fence. So they're not up here bothering us.
Don't say that too loudly, because Callie will want her own team of Amish fence builders.
I tell you what, they're having a ball
so she
out
can
there.
Play with, yes.
They've got 3/4 of a mile of fence to build together. The dogs are just laying there looking at them with just adoration. Anyway, I've kind of rambled on the question of the cover, but that's my gut.
You create your own covers, right? Or you have your covers created?
I commission them created, and I'd say that most of them come pretty close to what I want. At the end of the day, they're not always exactly what I imagined either, because I can't do them myself. If I could, I wish that I could. How do you feel about it?
I've talked about this sometimes on these podcasts, that the books that I have done, when I had books traditionally published, I had some really good covers. I had some real stinkers. There was one in particular where I always look at it and think, who are these geeks and what does it have to do with my characters? Who are these people? And I have one of where the hero was a bull rider. And, they tend to be wiry, and a lot of them tend to be fairly short. Mine wasn't short, but he was, wiry and thin. And there's like this sumo wrestler on the cover. I'm going, who is this? So, but as I've been doing my own, having my own covers done, when I really started in indie, I did do my own covers. It quickly, as whatever income I got, I turned around to having professionals do them. But you can't find people who match the characters in your head, not only on the stock photo, but anywhere. I've yet to see anybody who was exactly what I had in my head for the characters. So I've gone the other route of using landscapes, paintings, objects, photographs. To steer away from that, because it drives me nuts that I can't find the right person. And I've done a couple projects where you had to have a couple, you had to have people, and I was like, it was miserable. I can't tell you how many days I spent on stock photo sites.
I hear you. And of the 12 novels that I have out in my romantic mysteries, 9 of them do not have people on the cover, and it's for that reason. They just are never right. Now, I will say too that I have gone back, and I do have some nonfiction books, and the nonfiction, I've completely redone 5 of my 6 covers because I just hated them. And sometimes even when you commission them and think they're done, a year later you're like, what was I thinking? Why did I say yes to that? That's and I've made lots of micro changes, some a little bigger than micro, on covers, because again, like with errors, if something isn't working, one of the things I love about being an indie is that you have absolute control and the ability to make changes immediately. And so if a cover's not working, I'm going to pay to have it done again if I can figure out that's what's the problem, if people are really having a negative reaction. So,
and I think they age in a way too. And as I've done new covers for different series, now I have a series called A Place Called Home, which is set in Wyoming, not too far from where you are, actually, maybe a little south and a little tiny bit east. Those covers were from photographs that I had taken at various places of skies. And they've just, I loved them initially, but they've just gotten a little tattered. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know how electronic things can tatter, but they do. So those are in the process or have just been redone, depending on when this podcast comes out. So yeah, we update them. But I will also say to the readers that as a reader myself, when I see a cover that does not agree with my vision of the characters, clearly the cover is wrong. my vision is right.
And hang on to that as the reader, because your experience with what's inside the pages and what it puts in your mind, that is always should be your go-to. Stick with that.
Yeah. So just, remember, you're right. The cover's wrong.
Yes. And I tell you what, I find the whole struggle to get a cover just right. And I'm sitting here looking at a book in my hand of another author, and I'm literally sitting here thinking, I bought this book because I wanted to read this book. I am not loving this cover, So I think that, that's your fear as an author, is that someone will have the reaction I'm having to this book right now. But you hope that, like me, that they'll say, but I really want to read this book because of what's inside, and make my own judgment. And it's the same reason I a lot of times don't like to see the adaptations of books after I've read them. Don't like to see the movies because I don't want to replace what I created in my head.
Well, one of the good things about the ebooks is you don't see the cover as much.
I like that.
Yeah.
I really do.
Because I tend to read all the formats, so I'll have a hardcover going, I'll have a paperback book going, I'll have ebook 1 or 2 going depending on what gadget I'm using, and I'll have audiobooks going. And I do find that if it's a cover that irks me on a hardcover or a paperback, you're exposed to it more, and it bugs you more. So the other advice to readers, besides knowing that you are right, is to say, if you see a cover you don't particularly like, get it as an ebook, and you won't be annoyed as much, and you can still have the good stuff in the book.
Totally agree with that. Totally. As a reader, I like that experience better too. And I think that gets back to, I want what's in my imagination to trump everything as I experience the characters and the stories and the setting. So go for it, y'all. Get the ebooks.
So another reader asks us, where do your stories come from? And she says, I know one author who dreams her stories. Another has a character suddenly taking up residence in her head. And I always like to read this part. So how are your beautiful stories born?
Usually because of a character. I will have a character that comes to reside in my life, and the stories grow organically from that character and the life journey that she's on.
How does that character manifest to you first?
Gosh, usually because I will see something, usually another person, or I'll hear a voice, and something will pop into my head, and very quickly it becomes not that person, not that voice, but the character just grows and grows and grows and grows and grows and grows. And my best characters have started as supporting characters. I say best. My first novels featured Katie. Katie never got to be a supporting character, and she's well loved. But the rest of my characters all grew from some character came along that was in a supporting role, and they just got bigger and bigger and bigger in my head. And my favorite characters are the ones where you're writing along, and you maybe have outlined your book. I'm an outliner, but I've outlined my book. I think I know where I'm going, and then I'll start to laugh. And I don't know what's coming yet, but I know something is definitely up that I didn't plan for. And then this character will just appear, and I don't know where, I don't know how, but there they are, and they just tickle me. And from there, it's love, and we carry on together. So, but they all, some of my best characters come from people close to me. I have a male character that is the lead in some of my Ava books, and he's based on my brother. And I enjoy writing him because my brother's a hoot. I have one protagonist that's based on a best friend, and another protagonist that's very closely aligned with another close best friend. So they're inspired by real people. And then their journeys are a natural product of the imaginary lives they're living and who they are. With my Emily books, it was based on a friend that worked for Child Protective Services. And so I knew going into this, she had a heart for kids, that it was going to throw her right into the path of kids that were at high risk and had great needs. And the stories flowed really easily from her.
So you have this character, you have this idea. Now, the tricky part is, how do you turn it into a book?
It is the tricky part. And it's a few times has just been blind luck, just like, oh, I must start writing, and somehow I stumble into this. Sometimes it is storyboarding with my story partner. also known as my hunky husband. And we'll talk about it and talk about the character and where her life might lead her, which will lead us to plot ideas. Sometimes it's geographical. I'll take a look at the area that this person lives in. And I say geographical and cultural. So I'll look at the religious and historical influences, the geographical influences, which sometimes can also have a socioeconomic, angle. And so what kinds of things happen in that world, and which of those would cross over into this character? So before I start writing, I have a very good idea. Now, my last few novels, I've gotten a lot more rigorous, mainly because I've learned that rewriting more than once makes Pamela very, very unhappy. So I'd rather discover the epiphanies that lead to the plot and the resolution of plot and the good subplots and all the red herrings before I get to the end and have to go back and, do major upheaval. So I've really embraced the Libby Haw Take Off Your Pants outline method. I don't know if you're familiar with that book, but it's Libby, Libbie, and her last name is Haw. And what she provides is something that took my theory of outlining and my theory of one past manuscript revision and took it up a notch. And that is where you're breaking your outline down into ultimately beats. I'm using air quotes around my head. And to her, beats are scenes. And each scene is this logical extension of the character arc, the pace of the book, and the theme. And plot is how all of those stream together. And I have found it to be absolutely fabulous, and it makes me a more complete writer from the beginning. That was a really long answer to that question, but I get really excited when I talk about process. So probably the most boring thing that the readers could ever hear, and I'm like, going, yeah, let's talk process. Woohoo!
Well, what's your favorite part of the process?
My favorite part of the process is final rewrite, and for me, a final revision. So I'm not talking, sentence or word level editing per se, because that's encapsulated into it, but it's going through and it's taking your first draft, which is a very rough diamond, a very rough piece of coal, and discovering that the diamond you hoped would be there is inside, and that you are, after all, going to be capable of overcoming for me, great emotional trauma you had upon finishing the draft and thinking it was crap. And now getting to the point where you're like, I'm proud of this book. I like this book. I'm ready to unleash this baby on the world. So I love the magic of discovery of that final, major revision.
What's the worst part of the process for you?
The first sentence. And everything that comes after until the end. First drafts. I find first drafts to be hard. It's hard for me to keep my butt in the chair and force out new sentence after new sentence after new sentence. I don't mind going in and adding scenes or chapters after I'm done with first draft, but there's something about the expanse of 350 blank pages that just makes it where I can think of a lot of things I'd rather do, like scrub the tiles with toothbrush, or whatever. I find that first draft process hard. It's where a lot of the creativity lies. I'm going to caveat that and say a lot of it. It's a lot about discipline, making yourself do it, because it doesn't have to be good at that point, right? You have to write something in order to be able to revise it. And a bad first draft is still a lot better than no first draft at all. So I don't like that process of forcing myself to write that first draft, but I absolutely love, no matter how bad it is, taking that first draft and sparkling it up, and making it into something that I'd like to read, because ultimately I write books that I'd like to read. So anyway, process. Yes, let's talk more process.
So when you get stuck, Pamela, and if you don't get stuck, don't tell me, what do you do? How do you fix it?
Oh, gosh. Well, number one, I move to another part of the story. If I get stuck, I'll usually go to and try to write the ending, because I feel like that at least gives me, it hones in on, lesser possibilities to work with. And so that limits some of my feeling of the possibilities are so limitless that I feel paralyzed by their immensity. So I'll go write a different part of the book. I have one book came out, was the current trilogy that's releasing Bang, Bang, Bang this summer, Bombshell. I just couldn't start the dang book. And I had an outline. So I finally just picked the part of the book I found most interesting and started there. And that broke the floodgates. Sometimes I go back and talk to my story partner. Sometimes I put it down for a little bit, but I do get stuck. I get real stuck.
That's so interesting to me, though, because I don't outline. Outlines just kill stories for me. But what slows me down is needing to make decisions, especially needing to let go of possibilities, because you can only pursue so many. But if you have an outline, aren't those decisions already made?
Well, that's if I apply rigor in my outline. And sometimes my outlining looks like first 10 chapters and then, I get too excited and I want to start. And so I haven't nailed the ending down yet. Now, in the way that I've been doing lately with Libby Hawes' Take Off Your Pants book, yeah, you've nailed the ending. But even there, I just finished a novella that I wrote this month. And the ending I wrote before I wrote the middle. It gave me, even though I know where it's going, when you actually put the meat on the bones to me and flesh it out emotionally I get a better feel for my character and where she's going to end up. And so that helps me. And even with the outline, it helps me.
Okay. Do you have any books that you've put aside because they just would not gel, or do you jettison those books?
I have a small stack of, I normally know, this is one of the beautiful things to me about outlining is that I don't get very far into a book if I'm not able to move it forward in my mind, translating to paper in some version of an outline. So I've jettisoned a lot of ideas. But what I also find is, they're sitting in a stack, the virtual stack on my computer, little paragraphs or a couple of pages that talk about an idea that I hope I come back to later. There's some I really care about. I just haven't been able to figure out how to make them work. But I also find that if I have a character I really like, I'll jettison idea after idea after idea for plot, for the mystery plot of a story. And ultimately, if I just keep talking to her, she'll give me something, and if I keep researching and I keep, and it gets back again to the playlists I put together. Sometimes if I just listen hard enough, it starts telling me a story as I'm researching. So I discard a lot of plot ideas. But if I believe in a character, I just stick with her and keep kind of slogging through. So sometimes developing the idea for the next few books will take months, of background processing, researching, listening, talking, and then finally it'll come. And sometimes even then you get to the actual writing of the book and you're like, oh, that was all wrong. And, and you pants it anyway, right?
Well, I pants it all the time. So those ideas that you've jettisoned, do you ever recycle them? Do they show up for other? So it wasn't right for this character or this story, but maybe, in a different trilogy with a different lead character.
Yeah. Especially with subplots or with things that have to do with secondary characters I wanted to use. I'll have one that just didn't fit. And I'll begin to see, well, that's because their real place was over here. I have a stack of plots that I'm hoping will work for future characters. But so far, I keep passing them over in favor of new ideas. But I'm always kind of paging through them. You know what I mean? Just kind of flipping through and seeing, when I've been using that gray matter before, in those times it felt wasted, is any of it useful to me now? And pieces of it have been, and I hold out hope. I just feel like anything I ever take the time to write, to research, that I should keep it. I mean, if nothing else, it's useful for the development and the next step you take because you invested the energy in getting better. But I'm always even more hopeful that it'll end up in a book.
You've touched on this possibly, but in case there's more, is there something that you're really good at that few people know about?
I can sing karaoke sober. Does that count?
Wow, that's impressive.
Let's
Favorite karaoke song?
let's yeah. I love. Well, this would have to be. Which one is your favorite lately? Because I live in small towns where the only thing to do on Friday night sometimes is karaoke. So anyway, I have loved Girl Crush lately. I love that song. I love to sing it, but I tend to go towards country when I'm singing karaoke. So Maren Morris, Dixie Chicks, you know, fun stuff to do.
Were you at the karaoke last year at the Novelist Inc. conference?
I missed that,
Oh,
and I heard that it was a ball. I actually heard that somebody on this call might have sung. Is that correct?
No, I did not. I can't sing. But I did suggest the last song, which was "You Lost That Lovin' Feeling," which was
that's such a
great group sing. It was wonderful.
Oh, it's an anthem. It's an anthem.
Yes, it was a lot of fun. So when there's a huge crowd singing, I can sort of slip my not holding a tune voice in there too. That's a lot of fun.
I'm trying to think if there's anything really though that it's a hidden talent, and
I think that was a huge one. I'm totally impressed.
Sober karaoke, drunk karaoke, not so good.
So one of the readers asks, if you could write a book with any author, living or dead, who would you want to work with and why?
Pat Conroy. Mm-hmm. And I think that he has so many amazing gifts that made me want to be able to capture setting and characterization and emotion like he does. And, I write mysteries, but inside me, there's the girl that would love to have written The Great Santini or Lonesome Dove. Lonesome Dove is my favorite book ever written. I just happen to think I would enjoy working with Pat Conroy a whole lot because he was so real. Just so real.
That's a great choice.
Spent one summer kind of half-heartedly stalking him and never came in proximity to him other than I got to the gate of his house and realized, this is a gated community. I can't get in. I don't want to get arrested today. I'm just going to take pictures here within, basically seeing distance. But he's fantastic. The world lost a really amazing a person for capturing the heart of what it is to be human and experience pain and love. I just think he does it so beautifully.
Now, how else did you try to stalk him?
Well, at the time he just written a cookbook. Did you ever read his cookbook? His cookbook is freaking hilarious. And so we were trying to go around, trying to arrange my book tour where I could end up in the same place and show up and get my book signed. And we never were able to make it happen because at that time I was doing 60 cities in 60 days. I mean, literally from Houston to Minnesota to Boston to San Diego. And so it was a challenge because his were fewer and farther between. But that was my dream, was somehow get in line and, weep at his feet. But it just didn't happen. So we took our summer vacation from the tour near Fripp Island in South Carolina, hoping we'd run into him, and just try to haunt the places and drive past the different houses where he had history. And I just kept thinking he'd feel it in the air and he'd show up, and he didn't. I just must not have tried hard enough, Pat.
Charleston is probably my favorite city in the world.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of my tops. Doing that book tour a few years ago and hitting so many U.S. cities so fast really honed in for me what made places special to me. And I loved Charleston. I thought that Savannah was going to be that for me, but it wasn't. It was Charleston. It was wonderful.
I lived 5 years in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I would go down to Charleston. If you ever have a chance, I assume they still have it. They have the Festival of the Homes in the spring, and you get to
Oh,
go
that'd be
into the
fabulous.
historic houses that are now people's homes. And I just love
Mm-hmm.
that. To see the history lived in and brought in to today. I think it's terrific. We shouldn't get me started on Charleston.
We already spent a lot of time on Wyoming, and now we could do that with Charleston as well. But I came out of that summer with definitely this top 10 list of places to go back to. But most of them have not been, because we have just this wonderful love affair with this place in Wyoming.
That's hard when you want to be multiple places at the same time. Okay, you did a book tour. You must have had encounters with readers, continue to have encounters with readers. What are some things that have happened in these reader encounters? What interactions have you had?
I just cannot believe how awesome people are, for starters, that the people that I've met all over the country, because we're in this age of connectivity, have put themselves in my lives in such a way that many of them are friends.
Mm.
It's like this huge group of people that I would have never known in my life, but that can say, you remember when I met you in such and such a place? And the answer is yes, it's right here in my book where you signed your name and your email's here. And then they join my Facebook group, or they become beta readers or proofreaders, for part of my reader groups that do that. It's so cool, Pat, that we don't have to be a million miles away from these people. We can be as close as sharing our pictures on Facebook or following each other on Instagram. It's really, really fun. And it makes me feel bad as a reader that I didn't stalk Pat Conroy until 2013 because he deserved for me to stalk him. No, I'm half-heartedly serious there, but what I came away with is how open and caring people are. I had these sisters. The first one to contact me actually did it through my husband's Facebook, because she did not want to make me feel pressured or stalked. And she said, "You've caused me to have a reason to develop a real friendship with a sister, a half sister, who I wasn't kind to when we were growing up. And we decided we were going to try to get closer by reading books together. And she suggested we read your books, and you mean the world to us."
Oh.
And it was, how do you not cry when you get that? And so anyway, it's people like that you think you've just written a murder mystery, right? And somebody else tells you, no, it was a whole lot more than that to me, and you made me feel. Or I've had people that have written to me. One of my books deals with the loss of a spouse, and then having to save, this is going for Kona, and save the kids from the same person that's murdered the spouse. And ultimately, when the police are no help, solve the murder herself. And so it's a very emotional book and deals with a really hard topic. And I've gotten more letters about that book, and they really touched my heart, because I wrote it thinking, I want to capture that feeling. Remember, I said my greatest fear is loss of my husband or kids. I want to capture that feeling of what would happen if you face the greatest loss, but life doesn't give you time to mourn it. You're forced from mourning to protective to justice driven, all within one surge of powerful emotions. And that was where I was going anyway. And so I get letters about people saying, I lost my spouse a year ago, and this book was really important to me because of X and Y and Z. And it just, people are so giving to spend the time to tell you what a book means, not to mention all the ones that review. But honestly, I don't read reviews, but I do read these letters, and I feel it makes me feel very, very blessed.
You're an extrovert, aren't you?
I am an introverted extrovert in that I am outgoing, I can public speak, and I love to hermit. I spend most of my time alone. My husband travels for work, and so I am alone up on my little mountain, and it's where I get my energy. But when I do go out into public, I'm loud. And then I go hide again.
Just listening to you and how much you enjoy that. Because appearing places and doing signings just drains me.
Yes.
And I'm really good at talking with people. I enjoy talking with people. If people start talking about my books, it makes me shy. And a lot of people wouldn't believe that, but it does.
When I get around other writers, like at writer conferences, what exhausts me the most is one-on-one interaction. That requires the most of my giving of myself, if that makes sense. And so that's a lot like reader events, right? It's meeting one person one-on-one after another. After I got through with that 60-city book tour, it took me 6 weeks where I was not in a state of total adrenal fatigue and basically a mess. It was something I would never be able to do again. It also was one of the coolest experiences of my life, and something that you could not make me do for anything again. But it really, really, it really was something that I don't mean to minimize it at all by saying I wouldn't do it again. It was one of the coolest things I ever experienced. It was just really hard.
Yeah, I think as you were talking about that, I think for me, it's being the center of attention.
Mm-hmm.
Although I've done keynotes and I love that, but I felt like I was giving people something, information in my experience. And so that made it okay. Although I have to tell you, I had, this is a keynote for the Romance Writers of Australia. Fabulous group. Fabulous. And they said, it's a short little talk. It's only, I think it was 15 minutes. And she said, so you really, it's not long at all. You just be inspiring. I was like, panic, just be inspiring. Oh, okay. I can feel my heart beating faster now. And 2.5 years, 3 years later, it's still in anticipation of it. Okay. Let's talk about where you write, because you've talked about being in Texas and Wyoming. So you must be adjustable, that you can write in different places. And do you have a routine? And that question, that where you write, comes from a reader who I think she's going to get a good answer with this one. She asks if you have an inspirational view.
Oh, do I have an inspirational view? I love to write where I feel the outdoors around me. Some parts of the year that's still inside, but in Texas, I have a writing, it's kind of like a shed and a tent cross. It's like open, but with a roof. And it's up on the top of a hill overlooking our horse pasture and a pond and a creek and some trees. And I write there as often as the bugs aren't biting, or I can coat myself with enough bug spray. I have let the dogs kill a coral snake inside that tent, so you have to be careful. Lift your feet, look under them every now and then. I also have a screened porch in Texas, where I can be protected from the bugs, but I can still look down the hill on the horses. When I have to be inside, I have a recliner called the teddy bear chair, because it's like getting a hug from a teddy bear. And so that's what I'll do. I scooch it all around the house and move it to whatever window I currently want to look out of. In Wyoming, right now I'm in my teddy bear chair looking out a window over the view out our front deck. But as often as I can, I'll go sit on the front deck, or sometimes I'll even go just, take a camp chair and go find a good spot. I like to move around, and I like to be close to nature. And I'm happiest if I can see as many of my animals as possible. We've got 3 dogs, 2 horses, 3 donkeys, and 5 goats. And
do they travel from Texas to Wyoming?
The horses and dogs do. The donkeys and goats are pretty self-sufficient, and we have a caretaker in Texas, because when we're not in Texas, we rent our house on Airbnb, which has turned out to be tremendously rewarding, because people they give you a lot of love over and over again. You set their expectations that this is our house, we love it, we're willing to share it with you. They come and they rent it, and then they just give that love right back. So with one exception, in all the time we've been doing it, it's been super cool. And so we have caretakers that come and care for the house and prepare it for guests and take care of our goats and donkeys. Literally, I got a message from the caretaker today that said, "I'm pulling up to your house, and there are 3 goats and 5 donkeys on in your driveway." So apparently, a guest left the gate unlatched. But the good news is they remember where they're fed.
the important things, right?
Exactly.
I totally envy you the screen porch. I had one when I was in Virginia, and just lived there, as long as I could. I don't have one in Kentucky, and the bugs adore me. So that's a bad thing. I have to really pick my moments to be out on the deck. But I want a porch.
Our builder really thought I was crazy for not wanting a door into my screen porch. I just wanted it to be from the house and completely enclosed like another room. Pretend the screens are exterior walls. We went round and round about it. You're going to be sorry. You're going to want this door. I said, you're not listening. I don't ever want a bug to have an open highway, into my screen porch. I am bug phobic. And so I have this wonderful porch, and I don't care what anybody else thinks. There is no door.
It connects right to the house.
It connects to the house.
See, I have been thinking about a freestanding screen porch, because otherwise, wherever I would put it on the house, it would block natural light into the house, and I like the natural light too much. So that's percolating in the back of my head, but
you deserve it, Pat. Go for it.
Well, thank you. Okay, what of your books, for a brand new reader to you, what would be the best place to start, an entry point to your books?
I think that for people that really enjoy getting to experience it chronologically, that the book to start with is Saving Grace, which is the first in the Katie trilogy, because it is the earliest of all of the 6 female protagonists' adventures. But all of them are made to stand alone. They're repeats of characters, but they're not serial. You do not have to read one before the other. So if that doesn't matter to a reader, then I would pick the protagonist you think you have the most in common with and dive right in there, whether it's West Texas Emily or Caribbean Ava or Wyoming Maggie or, Michelle Texas. So whatever you think you kind of relate to the most. But most people like to start with Katie, but the people that have started with the last book in the series and gone back and read them all have said that wasn't an impediment. So dig in wherever you want.
Have you found that any of your books are overlooked more? Do you have any hidden gems among your?
I think for a long time, the hidden gem was Going for Kona. And I think that the reason that it was overlooked was because I wrote one of Michelle's books, Michelle being the protagonist, but I wrote 2 other complete trilogies in the meantime, and I didn't continue Michelle's story. Mm-hmm. And the reason is because Michelle, for me, was very emotional. She'd lost her husband. She was overcoming loss. And ultimately, we were going to have to take her on multiple stages of her journey coming back to life. And I couldn't rush that inside me. Mm-hmm. I needed to give her time. It would have felt artificial to throw her in the sack with some new guy. And, it's like, hello, your husband's dead, but it's time to write the new book. It just didn't work. And so people overlooked it because it felt like a standalone. And then the second one came out. It was the Silver Falchion winner, and the third is about to come out. And there's just been an explosion lately of people reading this book. It's the one I'm getting all the letters on right now. And I'm so happy. It's my husband's favorite book of any that I've written, even though I wrote it because I was mad at him. And the husband that dies is a triathlete. Well, my husband is a very serious amateur triathlete. And I was mad at him, and he came home that night, and I said, read this. And I killed him in the second chapter. And he's like, this is crap. What have you done? And he ultimately, the emotion of it swayed him, and he loved it. It's a really good mystery, too. So if you were to find the hidden gem, it would be my little sweet Going for Kona.
That's great. And it's great that it's coming to the fore now, and more people are recognizing it. That's terrific. Yeah, I often say that I kill people who annoy me. I don't think I've killed any people I'm related to, though.
the only family member I've killed.
Pretty important one.
The other thing I told my kids was that I wasn't going to ever have a pregnant teenager in my books until all my kids hit 20 or older, because I didn't want to write it true. And it was killing me because I really wanted to have this story where one of the tribulations that a protagonist was facing was that she was suddenly a grandmother of the child of one of her teens. And so I had to wait. And I literally started that book the day the youngest turned 20.
But I often think about that. People will talk about you should write what you know, and they and I think I don't necessarily want to write exactly what I know, because I already know it. I want to explore other things. And I got a lot of that about, you should write about working at the Washington Post. And particularly when I was in traditional publishing, the editors would say that. And I'd think, it is not romantic. It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My friends from my past life, I'll say, I love it when you write legal scenes. Why don't you write legal thrillers? It's like, well, because I don't want to.
Yeah.
I want to explore the things that intrigue me and that are new and interesting to me. And I didn't find that fun. I know people love to read it, but it's like you felt like the Washington Post. I didn't find it sexy and brilliant. I found it to be something I wanted to get away from.
Right. Yeah. Notice we're not doing it anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So how can people find out more about you and your books?
I am all over the place, but the easiest way is my website, which is PamelaFaganHutchins.com. PAMELAF as in Frank, AGANHUTCHINS.com. It's a mouthful, but you'll find me there, and you can find out more about the books. I've got things for book clubs on there, questions for you to work with as you work through a book with your group. I have my favorite charity on there. I'm really, really passionate about stopping human trafficking, and you can find places where you can go and get involved. You can even find out about how to come to a writing or readers retreat at my Texas or Wyoming house, or how to book them for yourself on Airbnb. So, it's one-stop shopping.
Wow. Okay. Lots. And you're a journalist's friend by spelling out the names. Yeah. I swear there are 17 ways to spell Dwayne.
Yeah. I had a reader once tell me, I believe her name was either Carol or Linda, but not an unusual name. And I said, I was making it out to her at a book signing. How do you spell that? She goes, the normal way. So let's say it was Linda, and I write Linda. And she goes, no, not like that.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, yes. Okay, I just bought a book.
Many ways to do that. Yes. Is there anything I haven't asked you that you would like to answer? Or that I should have asked you that you don't want to answer?
No, aren't those the best questions? No, this has been just a lovely conversation, and I love your reader focus and answering questions and helping them get to know more about the people that write the books they enjoy or have yet to enjoy. This has been a ton of fun.
Well, we still have my very favorite part, the rapid fire either ors. So are you ready to go?
Hit me.
Day or night?
Day.
Paper plates or best china?
Paper plates.
House decorating or gardening?
House decorating.
Pickup or sports car?
Pickup.
Heels or slippers?
Slippers.
Appetizers or dessert?
Appetizers.
Binge watching or make the watching last as long as possible?
Binge.
Hiking boots or cowboy boots?
Oh, gosh, Pat. Oh, goodness. Hiking, because they can be worn for both.
Spring or fall?
Spring. Wildflowers.
Ice cream or cake?
Ice cream.
Cruise or trekking vacation?
Trekking.
Daisies or roses?
Daisies.
Cat or dog?
Dog.
Coffee or tea?
My stomach says tea, but my heart says coffee.
Hot air balloon or train trip?
Train trip.
Winter Olympics or Summer Olympics?
Winter.
Nail polish or bare nails?
Bare nails.
Okay, this is the last one. Grab the best first or save the best for last?
Grab the best first.
Thank you so much for doing this, Pamela. It's been a lot of fun. And we hope the readers will come back next week for another edition of Authors Love Readers podcast, where you'll meet a new author and his or her stories behind the stories. And from now until then, I wish you a terrific week of reading. That's the show for this week. Hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for joining Authors Love Readers podcast. Remember, you can always find out more about our guest authors in the show notes, and you can find out more about me at www.patriciamclinn.com. You can also send in questions to be asked of future authors at podcast@authorslovereaders.com. Until next week, wishing you lots of happy reading. Bye. If you like this podcast, we hope you'll consider becoming a supporter through our Patreon page. With a small monthly donation as little as $1 a month, you can help with the hosting and editing costs that make the show possible. To thank our Patreon supporters, we offer them special bonuses. Find out more at authorslovereaders.com or at patreon.com/authorslovereaders. That's PATREON. We also hope you'll subscribe to this podcast and leave us a review wherever you listen to us. Both of those help more folks find the podcast. Of course, the very best way for other folks to find the podcast is for you to tell them about it. So we sure hope you will.